Hi, everyone. Welcome. Today, we are really excited to have on two really special guests. We have Peter Gerhardt and Shanna Bahry. Peter is the executive director of EPIC Programs in New Jersey. Shanna is the founder and executive director of Meaningful Hope. We have actually been in touch with the two of them over the last, few months. We go back years in terms of attending talks by Dr. Gerhardt and learning from them. And they've just come out with a book that we can't, say enough good things about, which I'm sure we're going to get into over the course of the podcast. But we are super excited to have you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
And thank you for this plug.
I would love for you to start with maybe a little bit of background and also what brought you to this topic, which is really all about, making meaningful programs that really go into adulthood for learners with ASD. It's really this focus on, in our field, we talk about social significance and social validity and all these really important concepts. And this seems to become kind of your, culmination in this book. So what brought you to this topic, and a little bit of like, where you're at, your background. I guess, Peter, we can start with you.
Well, I've been, first of all, thank you for having us. I really appreciate it. I've been in the field for over 4 decades, and I've seen a lot of positive changes, but I haven't seen enough positive changes. And working with adolescents and adults, it just was getting increasingly frustrating to see all this wasted potential. And you've probably heard me say that I think the biggest sin we commit in our field is that we waste kids' times. We teach them stuff that doesn't matter in ways that aren't effective in environments that never generalize. And Shanna then said, "You need to write this down, idiot."
Very true.
It's very true. Yeah.
Mine is
I'll let her talk now then.
So I've been in the field a while, not as long as Peter, but I was lucky early on in my career to kind of work in a school that was connected to an adult program. So I was fortunate enough to see kind of where some of these individuals go when they grow up. And what I got to see was, it's not great. And just, it was an eye-opening experience that I think not enough get exposed to, but kind of knowing where they go, I think I became kind of passionate about like, how do we make this better, or isn't there something better we can provide? And then I would go to Peter's talks, as you both said you used to, and I would leave so inspired, like, well, this is, common sense. Why isn't everybody doing this? And then once I went to Endicott to get my PhD under his advisement, I was able to work directly with him. And then we were kind of just like, we need to write this down and we need to give people kind of a blueprint of how to do this. Because I think people, including myself, would leave his talks inspired, but then kind of go back to work and doing the same old thing. So I think we really wanted to give people something we could hand them to really do this and make effective changes for the people that they support.
I also love the title of your book, Make It Meaningful. It just says so much right there. I started working in the field with early intervention, as did a lot of us. And, I've been in the field long enough that my kids have grown up, right? And half of them I don't see anymore because they're off doing their own thing. But some of them are, still receiving services, or they've gone to a group home, or they're transitioning away from their parents' house somehow. And, I'm also going into programs now where adults are doing flashcards. You're like, well, wait, why? What's going on? Or there's adults who, still can't shower by themselves. And now all of a sudden you've got, a 23-year-old male in the shower, and you've got an 18-year-old female who needs to teach them how to shower. And that's kind of scary. So your book touches on some of these things. And I really just love the message.
And I'm wondering, like, you mentioned that there's such a, gap in the field, but at the same time, we talk in our field about the importance of being effective and generalizability, and is that a word? Yeah. And, social significance. Why do you think that this is so hard for so many of us professionals? Because I love how you say, like, when you guys started, a lot of your presentations, you talk about how adulthood is most of our clients' lives. And we focus so much on preschool and all of those things. But why are we forgetting that this is such an important part of our clients' trajectories?
Well, I think part of it is that within behavior analysis, at least, we grew increasingly fascinated with our technical competence, our technical proficiency. And we forgot that we're not supposed to be all about the process, but we're supposed to be all about the product, about the outcome. So people weren't looking at, well, what did this do in the result? They're looking at, like, was your SD appropriate? Was your reinforcement interval correct? Was this and that, like, as opposed to saying, yeah, but now he can do his own laundry, or he can read 50 Dolch sight words, like one or the other. Like, those two extremes. I think we just became so fascinated with our technical competence that we missed the train.
Yeah,
Right.
and
Forget to see the big picture.
Right.
right. Yeah. And the only thing I was going to add was I think a lot of practitioners too are kind of, we call it like programming with blinders on almost. I think we're just thinking too short-sighted. So we're thinking in, the six-month terms of a treatment plan or 1 year of an IEP. And then we're kind of just programming for that amount of time and then starting over. Okay, what's the goal for the next year? But I think what we really miss as a field and in general working with this population is how to make sure that what we're doing really matters and that we're thinking long term. So I think that's a really big issue too.
Okay. One of the takeaways that I loved from the book, I mean, there were so many good lines in the book. One of them that we start to refer to a lot in the work that we do is double digits time to pivot. And you talk a lot about how if you're still doing the same thing from when your student is, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and they're starting to be 10, 11, and they're not yet learning to read, and they're not yet really mastering them at the pace that they need to be mastering, we need to shift focus. And why is that so important? At the age of 10, 11, that they've been, in school, they're not yet an adult. Why is it really so important that at that age really is that pivotal time to switch?
So we kind of came up with that one because it kind of rhymes and sounds good, and we're hoping that it will be easy to remember. But around age 10 or 11 is kind of the mark of adolescence, according to most sources. So we kind of thought that would be a good kind of place to think about really starting to pivot what we're talking about, because we talk about two different curricular paths, so adaptive and also developmental or academic. So on that academic or developmental path, the goal is to catch you up to same age peers and ideally transition into school with those same age peers. And then the adaptive path is really meant to be just all those independent skills that someone needs to function in life. So the idea is that when you can be on the developmental path and that may be appropriate, but at a certain point, we have to start thinking critically, are they going to catch up to same age peers in the academic area? Are they going to be able to transition to typically developing school programming and everything like that? And if they're not, we really suggest you start thinking around that age 10, making those important decisions as a team with the family and everyone else who knows the learner, but just start thinking about if they're not on that track, we really want to shift our focus a little bit to really being more adaptive. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing adaptive programming while we're on the developmental path, but really just more of the focus needs to shift a little bit.
Do you have tips on talking to parents about this? There's parents who are still very much on the, well, we need my kid to talk, my kid to communicate, which I completely understand. But, I really want to be focusing on academics. A lot of parents have the perception of, if I'm going to be focusing on life skills, I'm giving up on everything else.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to change some parents' perspectives. So what tips do you have on talking to parents about this?
Well, it's a little bit different for me, just because parents who come to me know what I do. So I don't have to necessarily convince them that this is why this is so important. But in the past, like, one of the examples I've always used is we're not dumbing down the curriculum. We are actually making it harder. Like, do you know how complex a decision-making tree is to cross the street safely in New York City? That's harder than inferential calculus. And crossing the street in New York City, you're never more than 50 feet away from a corner. Like, so you have to learn that skill. It's this misnomer that when we get into life skills, that it's a dumbing down of the curriculum. It's not at all. It's opening up opportunities for the person.
Yeah.
Nobody ever says, let's go over to Joe's and do some math. But people say, let's go over to Joe's and shoot some hoops.
I always quote you. I went to a presentation years ago and I remember you saying something like, nobody from across the bar says, wow, that person is really cute. They know that all of the states and can name every capital.
Yep, that's
Yeah. I mean, no,
Yeah.
you really have a knack of like making it seem so obvious, like what, and like kind of using regular language. And I think that's what I loved so much about the book also is that it was so practical. And then, speaking on the topic of parents, one of the things you suggest in the book is having like a really important conversation, goal planning, goal setting conversation with parents as part of this transition. And that's something that we actually spent a couple months doing over the summer as we're transitioning a lot of our students into their, teenage years, and we don't yet quite have adults. And it was so eye-opening in so many ways to be able to do that. First of all, we use the template which you supply in electronic version, which I'm so thankful for. You don't have to like pull apart the book and photocopy it. And we use, you gave such good guidance on how to have this conversation, how to do it in a way that is still empathetic and it's not judgmental, which like so many of us can use guidance on. But then also some of the information was so enlightening in what parents are really struggling with. Was one really informative use of that interview, but it was also, some of these parents have been with us for so many years and we're just like, nobody ever asked, what I'm really struggling with or what I would want my child to work on, because we spent so many years like in school and doing the typical stuff. And obviously when we have like a one-to-one program, we'll get their goals, but like your, the way you guided through the interview was so much more like, in depth and personal and relevant to their lives. So I guess how did that evolve, or like what would you like people to be using that for?
I think like what you said, I think it can be used a couple different ways, but one of the ways, I mean, is, part of an intake assessment when you're getting to know the parent for the first time and really learning what they want the focus to be. And I think kids start off on a really good foot to making sure they understand that they're kind of the center of programming and making sure that it really works for them and their lives and makes their lives better too. But I think kind of what you alluded to is also another way you could do it. If you've been with a learner for many years, it can still be a great way to just check in with the family and think of it as a way to kind of reassess and potentially pivot different directions depending on what they are wanting to prioritize. And it could be done every couple years, every year, but if you're just coming across the book and the tool, I think could be a really good way to just stop and think like, okay, we haven't really talked about this before, but let's pretend that I haven't known you for years, and let's talk about all of these different things. And I think it can be, we've seen practitioners use it and think like, wow, I never knew that they were worried about that. And so I think it's a good way to frame a conversation to really put it on the tool of like, oh, well, it's asking me to ask you this. It's like, so I think it can be, it can bring up some topics you may not have thought of otherwise. So.
yeah, and I would just like add, I think a skill that most professionals, whether they're special educators or behavior analysts or speech paths, like don't have is the ability to shut up and listen.
Yeah.
Because we're trained as problem solvers. We're trained to go in and say, I have the solution for you. When, it's not a research-based thing, but it's a personal observation that if I let people talk, I solve half of their problems just by listening.
Right.
They really just wanted someone to hear them, and not be told what to do or that there was nothing wrong, or they were like all of the stuff. So I think the greatest skill that we can acquire is to shut up and listen, which also that's what the meaningful goal guide does. It forces you to shut up and listen.
Yeah, we
So
really want to make sure that it's information seeking conversation, and it's not just like other assessments, maybe where you're kind of checking off boxes. Oh, he can do this, he can do that. The goal is to really just let the conversation flow and let them kind of lead the conversation. So we think that's what kind of makes it different too, and can help build rapport as you're going also.
Yeah, totally. And what was also important, if I could add to, we don't tend to listen enough. When we had these conversations, it wasn't with a computer. And I always encourage people, like, don't bring your computer to every parent meeting, and, you can write notes and you can always fill it in later, but it doesn't have to be like this cold, sterile, like awkward conversation. So I think that's really important. And for somebody who, may be new to this whole concept of thinking about adulthood or thinking about applied goals, what would you want them to take away from this book as something that they could, start implementing right away or start changing about what they're doing right away?
Well, it's like two little bumper sticker moments.
I love
Yeah.
those.
One is just simply, and I forget her name, but she wrote the Happiness Project. What you do every day matters more than what you do once in a while. So look at your own life and go through the whole list of things that you do every day, and then prioritize how that would impact him or her going forward. The other thing is independence is more important than perfection.
I love that.
Yeah, we get so hung up on step 99 in our task analysis that we forget that it's outcomes that we're looking for. Like just because he didn't clean under his fingernails doesn't mean it wasn't a good shower. And we get so hung up on sometimes the minutia of our tasks that we forget that it's all about, again, the outcome.
Right. Yeah, I think if there was one or two takeaways for me, I think children with autism or other disabilities become adults with autism. So I think that's super important to think about. No matter who you're working with the future adults. So I know so much of our field in behavior analysis, we're working with little kids, but it doesn't mean, that you're working with just a little kid. They're a future adult. So I think if we look at everyone as a future adult, that can really help us frame what we're doing and making sure that we're not just programming for the year ahead, but we're thinking long term. No matter what, if they're younger, we're maybe just thinking 3 to 5 years ahead, but if they're older, we want to be thinking also 3 to 5 years ahead, but also into adulthood. So I think that is one of the most important things, to make sure we're thinking long term and looking at every individual as a future adult.
That is so huge. Every single client I have has at least one or two life skills in their program, regardless of their age. And it's one thing that has stuck with me over the years is that, as a future adult, you don't want that future adult to have to lose their dignity to anyone, right? I mean, if they can be as independent as possible in the bathroom while they're getting dressed, in the shower, then that's better, because that way, they're not losing their dignity. They don't have to be naked in front of another person. And that is so huge. And it goes back to my example of, having a 23-year-old in the shower with, their 18-year-old therapist. It's just not a great scene. And I'd rather teach that when they're 5 versus when they're 25.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like the sociological literature, I think it's called the soft bias of low expectations. That we're almost like, well, he can't do that, or he can't learn that. It's like, no, you can't teach it. Like, that's what you're telling me when you say that.
There's a video going around that's it's become viral. It's somebody with Down syndrome, and it's called Assume I Can. And it's really actually a powerful message. And it shouldn't be about, well, you can't do that because it's no, assume I can.
Right.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
To Shayna's point about thinking about long-term outcomes, that was also a major change that we made, in that now with some of our youngest students, on any of their goal planning includes a long-term outcome. And I think for a lot of people, it was like, well, why does it matter? Let's just focus on what they can do now. But it's so important to think about, when you have independent skills, you have to pick and choose and prioritize. You can't do everything. So you have to think about what's going to be most important. So that independence piece.
Yeah, and I think everyone can get a little bit more independent. Peter talks a lot about just slightly less dependent. We just want to be continually moving towards someone be as independent as possible for them. And I think we can always move the needle on that, no matter what level of ability.
If you had to choose a few, like these are like the top 3 skills, if you had to pick, of independence, what would they be?
Don't say it depends on the learner. I know it does, but
My number one is like appropriate toileting. That's like the number one. I still know so many adults who don't wipe after a bowel movement, don't flush after using the like all of these basic social hygiene skills. Um, I think, and I know schools that don't teach it anymore. They say no, parents have to teach toilet training as opposed to us teaching it, and I think that's kind of backwards. What would be your number two, Shayna?
Um, toileting was going to be my number one too. I don't know, something in the self-care realm, I think something like showering or dressing, probably one of those. Just again, just for the dignity piece, like you mentioned, Shayna, but also we talk a lot about how these skills are safety skills. So it's so important to make sure that as much as you can to make sure an individual doesn't have to be alone behind a closed door with another adult. Just for safety against, potential abuse. We don't want to think that way, but it is a reality that's important to think about. So I think any of those really personal independent skills that are going to have to be alone behind closed doors are kind of be some of those most important skills, I would say.
Yeah, and I think my third one, and might sound a little odd, but I think advocacy skills, like being able to say no, I don't want to do that, or yes, I do want to do that, or like, at all different levels. Like you don't have to be able to discuss a paragraph to have advocacy skills, and it's so important. Like think of yourself, like the ability to like make choices in your life and advocate for what you want, how much that improves your life. And if somebody came in and took that all away and said, no, this is what you're gonna have for lunch, this is when you're gonna get up, this is what you're gonna wear, this is what, like, you'd be freaking pissed, like,
And especially with our students who are so vulnerable. One of our parents recently said, even though like my child won't get independent with a lot of things, I want them to be autonomous. I want them to have the ability to like make choices, have a say, do things that they love. And I think that's so important.
I also think from a very young age, as ABA professionals, we teach kids to follow adult directions all the time. And that is great when they're 2 years old and you need to get a whole bunch of information into them. But as they get older, like we really do need our kids to say, no, like I don't want to do that right now. No, I want to do this instead. Or, hey, you know what? Can we do this before we do this? And maybe some adults have that much language and can use that. But those adults who don't, as long as they can start pointing to things and even just, indicate that they don't want something non-vocally somehow, is so crucial. So when you said, this may sound silly, I think that is so huge. We need to teach that right from the get-go.
Yeah, I think it's
sometimes I actually think non-compliance is a really positive skill in my life. There are things that I just don't want to do.
And I think there's so many times throughout the day, like if I had to take data on myself, not only how many choices I make throughout the day, that'd actually be a good one, but how many times I say no, or like, not right now, I don't feel like doing that right now.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, Shane, I interrupted you.
No, I was going to say something similar. I think we have misconception, or people have misconception, that if someone can't speak in, full sentences, that they can't communicate some of that stuff. But I think, we can do it in one word, like less than one word, with pictures, or, with an augmentative device. There are so many ways, if we get creative and, really make an effort, we can definitely still teach these skills, no matter what level of language they're at.
I had a student one time who used to wave his finger like this. We taught him to wave his finger because that's all he could do. But all of a sudden, you'd present something like, oh, here comes that finger again. And just so that people who aren't watching this, it was the index finger, not the middle finger.
But I mean, speaking of creativity, you have a lot of ideas in your book of ways like kind of workarounds. And we don't have to teach our students to, I always remember this example, to measure laundry detergent when you could just use the Tide Pod. What other examples are there like that?
Peter, you wanna?
Well, I think like I wear at this point in my life like loafers and slip-on Converse. I can tie shoes, I can, but I prefer to just step into them like Skechers slip-ins. Like I'm like they're great. Um, Microwavable, healthy microwavable meals over cooking extended meals, not for every meal, but for some meals. Not sorting your laundry to do laundry. Like I own nothing by Hermes. It's not going to get, everything I own is not going to get ruined in the washer. So, do everything in cold.
My husband buys one brand of socks and one color. And that way he doesn't have to sort socks ever. You know what?
Yeah,
Like,
it's perfect.
he just puts the two together and he's done.
Yeah, that's a great example, actually. The rule is like, what is the quickest, fastest, easiest way to accomplish this task?
Right. I think what's so important is because we don't have time to waste. We want to teach skills that can be mastered quickly so you can move on to the next skill, especially if some of these skills are harder to teach, being that they're adaptive and, slightly more complicated. We want to make them as less complicated as possible because there's just so much to teach. We don't have time. So I think that's so important. And there's there's a lot of research that supports making a task easier, more effective, and efficient. That's just such an easier way for us to teach too. So it's efficient on both sides. It's more efficient for the learner and it's more efficient as the practitioner teaching to just teach a skill that's easier so they can master it quickly.
That's true. It's those quick wins for the professionals as well, right? If you're on the same level or, oh, I've got to do this task analysis over and it's the same step over and over again, and we've been stuck on this for 6 months. As a professional, how motivated are you to go back and teach that program? You're not, because you're not seeing the movement. So being able to move a bit faster as a professional is great as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, the other day, Shana and I were in a meeting, and the person we were meeting with, and I won't say the app, but it was a note-taking app that she was using. And then at the end, she sent us like what it had written, and it had like responsibilities and goals. And I'm like, I'm never taking another note in my life. Like, why do I have to like bother with that?
Yeah.
There's this resource I could use.
With technology, there's something new like that comes out every day. So it's like if we just can stay on top of it and just, search things, there's always going to be a hack out there that was invented a week ago that we didn't know about before. So there's always, I think, a way to find those workarounds, even if you don't know of them right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. Your book really does highlight looking for those workarounds and really going, okay, let's work smart and really working efficiently so that we can teach our learners as much as possible in as short of a time as possible because they have no time to waste.
Yeah.
Something that, we like to ask towards the end is we have a lot of, BCBAs who listen to this. A lot of them are newly minted, kind of, the zealous, overeager people coming into the field. What is some advice that you would like to give that newly minted BCBA?
Well, I'll go first. What I want people to realize is that there's a difference between acting like a behavior analyst and thinking like a behavior analyst. It's easy to act like a behavior analyst and talk about data and like do your great, but and I find this really interesting that in a field that is based upon observable, measurable behavior, our most important tool is a private event that we cannot measure. Yeah. Yes, it's how to think about behavior from the point of view of the person you're working with, not from my point of view, from his or her point of view. And then the second quick thing, there is no reason in this field that you should allow your ego to get in the way of working with anybody, because it's all about the data. Like, if you think you're right, then do it and check the data. The student is always right. Like, it's that simple. There shouldn't be this like, oh, well, that's a stupid idea. Or that's like, do it for 3 days. I've had some really stupid ideas work. I've had a lot fail, but still, you learn by failure. So that's what I would say. Shanna?
I think kind of similar to that in terms of like thinking like a behavior analyst. I think a lot of newly minted BCBAs, and this could be a whole nother conversation of how we need to change our training and everything, but I think a lot of times we graduate past the exam and then, we're given a pile of assessments and curricula that we can use for, choosing what skills to teach. And I think one of the things we really wanted to drive home in the book is to really make sure you're thinking about what you're teaching and not just following through a assessment or curricula and just, teaching skills of their sequential order or, simple presence in one of those tools and just teaching because this comes next. We need to really think bigger, think about the learner as a whole person and, they're where they're at now, where they'll be in a year, 3 years, 5 years, and later on down the line. And we need to be just really challenging ourselves to think bigger and to think more critically. And what we try to do in the book is kind of give people permission to do that too, to not think like, okay, well, I have to use this XYZ assessment and what says next I have to teach this and they don't have this skill. So we got to teach that to fill off that box. So I think that's one of the biggest things that I think is important to making sure we're thinking about what we teach. And like what Peter said earlier, not focusing too much on the evidence-based procedures, which is also important, but making sure we're using them to teach the right skills.
You mean not evidence-based? No, I know we sometimes focus too much on that. And I love what you said, like, how can we really, observe thinking like a behavior analyst, but yet it's so important. And we talk about that all the time, kind of, thinking bigger and trying to train people into that way of thinking. How can people find out more about the book, where they can get it, what it offers them?
So we have a website people can go to, www.makeitmeaningful.info. We have some additional info there about how and why we wrote the book, but also there's ability to purchase there across all different Amazon marketplaces. So whether they're in Canada, where you all are, or the US, or there's a number of other marketplaces. So yeah. And then also to access all the tools we have, I forget the number of tools that we have in there, but there are a number of tools, data sheets, things you can post up in your workplace to help as like a job aid. So there's a number of things in there and they're all downloadable and most of them are editable if they need to be. So we're hoping that it can really be a good companion to using the book and reading through how we envision the tools to be used, but to really be something you can take to your practice and, put in action.
I wanted to say thank you so much for writing this book. It is so needed in this field. So any of you who haven't checked out that book, go check it out. It is incredible. And, at the beginning, I was like, well, I need it because I'm teaching adults. But really, Shana, to your point, everyone is a future adult. So if you're, doing anything in this field in terms of, trying to put in some longer term goals for some of the younger kiddos you work with, get this book. It really does drive home the point that the programs we need to put in are functional. They have to be.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you both.
Thank you very much for having us. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, appreciate you having us.
It's been so great talking to you. Thank you.